How you doing, everyone? Greetings and welcome to this year's very first episode of 8 Bits in the Basement. So we're kind of the 18th of January right now at nearly 10 o'clock in the morning. So it's kind of late to be wishing you a very, very happy 2025, but let me do it nonetheless. And also say that I hope you had a fantastic holiday period. So over Christmas, what I was doing was I was trying to get this Sinclair ZX Spectrum 48K that I picked up more than a year ago now working. It really was the only kind of bit of time I had to work on this system, and it had a whole plethora of problems. We're talking about a CPU that wasn't working at all, it was completely dead, along with loads of memory chips that needed changing, and also it needed capacitors changed too. There was one or two that brought the whole system down even when everything else seemed to be working. Now, with that being said, the system is only 90% still, so it's not really all that reliable. But it was through testing that system that I found the focal point of today's video. You see, I was running all kinds of games on things, seeing if I could get it to work, and I came across a game called E.T. So I launched that, and it reminded me so much of the Atari 2600 version of E.T., which was criticized of having pits that made no sense, yet this Spectrum version was full of pits as well. So I kind of did a little bit of investigation to see what the game was, where it came from. And as it turns out, a guy called Mark Winn from Abergavenny in Gwent had written it way back in, I suppose, 1982, because he got the code listing published in the April 1983 issue of Sinclair User, which was their first anniversary issue. And, well, it's funny, it really interested me that a game like E.T. for the Atari 2600, which everyone knows the history of, written by Howard Scott Warshaw in a very small window of like 5 to 6 weeks, pretty much is accused of being the worst game ever written anywhere for any system and brought down the entire gaming industry in the US back in the early 80s. So, I mean, that being said, it seems that Mark Winn didn't agree with that at all. He must have thought it was a pretty good game to write a Spectrum conversion in BASIC for. And I'll be honest, I find E.T. for the 2600 to be a fun game as well, and that's why this interested me so. But I thought it might be interesting to look at two versions side by side. We'll start with Howard Scott Warshaw's Atari 2600 version, and then we'll move on and have a little look at Mark Winn's ZX Spectrum conversion. So I'm going to use an emulator for this because I know my little ZX Spectrum will let me down on it if not. So move in a little closer and we'll get started.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start this little exploration or comparison between the two games, starting with the Atari 2600 version. The version that was written for Atari's kind of flagship product for the Christmas market of 1982, and everybody knows it failed miserably. Howard Scott Warshaw was kind of entrusted with the task of writing this game as a one-man kind of game writing team. Well, that's not really true. There was a guy doing some of the graphics for him too, but he was given 5 to 6 weeks in order to make the game. And if you're interested, there is a book that Howard Scott Warshaw himself wrote called Once Upon Atari. It's a fantastic read if you're into this stuff. I only say it because I've read the book once or twice myself, and I found it to be really a fascinating read, and I would recommend it. But right here, what we're looking at is the title screen of E.T., and this was a first in home video games. Before E.T., you didn't really have title screens. What you had were kind of a rolling demo of the game, or that kind of a thing. And E.T. was a game of quite a few firsts for when it came out. When we start the game, you'll find there's a little cutscene where E.T. is kind of put into a forest by his little spaceship. And from here we start our adventure. And in our adventure, what we're basically trying to do is we're trying to collect 3 pieces that'll make up a little telephone that we can phone home. As we go around, our energy on the bottom of the screen is diminishing, so we need to do or complete our task before all our energy is gone. You see this guy here? There's 2 enemies in the game. That's one of the first ones. He's the agent, and what he'll do is he'll try and hinder us by robbing parts of our telephone that we've picked up, so can pretty much send us back to square one. As you see, as I move around the first screen here, you'll see different icons that appear on the top of the screen. There's an arrow to the right here. There's an arrow facing down that we saw there just a second ago. There's this little box here. And what they are is they are different points on the screen that do different things with our action button. Basically, this point here is where we would go at the very end of the game to be picked up by our spaceship, once we had gotten our phone pieces and we had called our spaceship. And the arrows will bring us up the screen, down the screen, to the left, to the right, so on and so forth. But basically, we've got our forest screen, and then we've got 3 of these pit screens, the infamous pit screens. And here we've got a question mark that will make a pit flash a little bit if there's a piece of the telephone we're looking for in it. That guy there, he's the second of our enemies. So we've got our agent we saw a moment ago. That guy is the scientist, and all he does is bring us back to this screen here. So we've got our agent that steals pieces, and we've got our scientist that brings us back here. That's Elliot's house at the bottom. So basically, we've got a number of screens, and we've got pits that we fall into. This is what this game was kind of plagued with. Every time you came out of a pit, you'd fall back into a pit. And in some cases, it was like something that went on for a long time. And every time you came out of the pit, you were losing energy. So it was kind of, it made the game not a whole lot of fun to play in some instances. But, you see, it's it's happening. Yeah, this is one of the, oh Jesus, this is one of the things about this game. Here we go, we're after getting out of our pit. You see there's a little dot up at the top of the screen. I'll try and go back up there. That is a Reese's Pieces, a little sweet that we can pick up. And we can use those throughout the game to replenish our energy. But basically, this is the game. Oh look, we've got a piece of a telephone. I pick it up. I've got a piece of a telephone, and now I need to try and keep that. You'll see it's like a little C on the left-hand side of the screen. The agent touched me, and I lost the piece of the telephone. That is basically E.T. for the Atari 2600. It's a kind of an adventure, puzzly game with a couple of people there to try and kind of prevent you from achieving your goal. And yeah, items are placed randomly at the beginning of the game and whatnot. And that is pretty much the game. So, what we're going to do now is we're going to have a little look at Mark Winn's version that he wrote for the ZX Spectrum. See how it compares. Okay, so here we are loading up E.T. Mark Winn's version of E.T. for the Spectrum 48K. It was actually for the Spectrum 16K. But this was a type-in program that was originally published in Sinclair User in their August 1983 edition. So when it starts up, it plays music that kind of resembles but isn't quite the E.T. theme tune. And as you can see over here on the left hand side of the screen, we've got a kind of a white E.T. that looks, well, he does look a bit like E.T. alright. But this is a very cut down kind of poor man's version of the Atari 2600. Which you would expect. It's written in BASIC. We've got our energy up at the top of the screen. Every time we move, we can move up, down, and left and right. We can't actually go diagonal though. But every time we move, we lose 1 energy point. And when we use our action button, we lose 5 energy points. So we start off with 600 energy points. And what we need to do is we need to go into all of these little holes or pits. And again, we're trying to find 3 pieces that'll make up our telephone in order to win the game. As we move around, we're losing energy, and if we lose all our energy, it's game over. Now, we go into a hole just by touching it, and there's 3 things that'll happen in a hole. Either there'll be nothing at all, there'll be a little Reese's Pieces in the form of a little sweet like you see here, or there'll be a piece of the telephone. And to get out of the hole, we press our action button and we push up and we fly back out, pretty much like we did in the Atari 2600 version. Now, Mark did actually go to the trouble of putting different zones into the game as well. And as you're moving around, sometimes a little icon will appear at the top of the screen. As you see there, there's just a little what looks like a window. Now, I'm not sure what exactly that does first when we press the action button, but there are apparently a number of these icons around that perform different things, pretty much like they did in the Atari 2600 version. And that, in a nutshell, is this version of the game. There are no enemies coming after us, and we're pretty much moving around the screen, investigating the little pits that appear in random places each time we start the game, and also the foam pieces are randomly put in the pits as well, so there's replay value, I suppose. However, one of the criticisms of this game is that it is pure luck. I mean, there is no way of really knowing where a piece is in. It seems to be after sticking. Oh no, it didn't. I must have paused it. I don't know. Oh no, okay, I see. When there's nothing in a hole, you can't move around. You just have to come back out. But there's no real way of knowing where something is in one of the pits, unless he's after putting an icon that I haven't found to let me know. And there is one other little interesting thing I thought. He found an ingenious way of not falling into the pits again and again and again. When you come out of a pit, you're placed somewhere on the screen where there are no pits. So there you go. That's what he did there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly just jump ahead to kind of game over, and then I'll just show you a code listing as well. Okay, so we're down to 9 energy, which means pretty much there's going to be game over very, very soon. And there we go. It says, unfortunately, E.T. has perished due to lack of energy, which I suppose lack of energy. So what we can do is we can press Q to quit or Y to replay. And if we press Q, what it does is it pretty much breaks out of the game and brings us back to the basic prompt, from where we can actually get a full listing of the game. So there we go. We've got line 1 is a remark. E.T. was written by Mark Winn of Abergavenny, Gwent on Sunday, April 83, 70. I'm not sure what 70, maybe the 7th of April 1983. And well, if it was done very fast because it was published almost immediately then. But no, it's pretty much. Oh look, we've got phone pieces equals 0. Let can equal 0. That must be our candy, our Reese's Pieces. Let candy equal 80. Not sure what that is. Phone 20 and let flour 50. So I'm not sure, but we've got stuff in there. We've got code going down through. You could run down through the code and see what. Hang on. See what you could change the game to your own liking, I suppose, or it would be an interesting way to learn a little bit of BASIC as well.
So that's pretty much it for the first video of 2025, and I really hope that you enjoyed this comparison look between the Atari 2600 version of ET and Mark Winn's BASIC version for the ZX Spectrum. And I thought it was kind of interesting because you get a little window into the early days of the ZX Spectrum. I mean, the system had just pretty much been released and people were fooling around with it, seeing what it could do just using BASIC. And ET there is a nice little example of that, trying to emulate a game that was quite popular, I suppose, at the time on the Atari 2600 for the Spectrum. But yeah, it got me thinking a little bit, and I suppose I can tell you a cautionary tale when it comes to this kind of nostalgia thing. And yeah, pretty much when I was 7 or 8 years of age, back in 1983, in New Ross, in County Wexford, on a Saturday afternoon, I was sitting in the cinema, which has long since closed, with my sister and my dad. And we were getting ready to watch E.T. So for the very first time. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I even shed a tear when we thought E.T. was dead. Spoiler alert, he doesn't actually die. But I remember afterwards, I wanted to see it again. And always, like a little while later, there would have been the VHS version come out to rent. And we were kind of waiting for that to happen. But of course it never did, because Spielberg had some kind of a Didn't want it to come out on VHS or something, as I understand. But I remember in the schoolyard, everyone used to talk about E.T. We all kind of enjoyed it, and we all wanted to see it again. But it wasn't until years later, maybe 11 or 12 years later, I remember there was one Christmas that it passed on BBC. And I recorded it, came back in from the pub and decided I was going to watch it. So I was sitting down in front of it, and I remember I was smoking 1 or 2 fags watching it, and so I was older than I would have been when I was 7 or 8 years of age. And basically after about 40 minutes of it, I turned it off. I got to the point where Elliot found E.T. under a bridge, and he was kind of all white and all rubbery looking, and I remember thinking to myself, people, what the heck are you watching, man? I said, this is, how did I think this was good? But I think it shows that when you're younger, the things that mark you, the things that touch you, the things that kind of leave an impression on you are much different through a child's eyes than they are through an adult's eyes, which makes an awful lot of sense. But yeah, I think really the lesson to be taken from that is when it comes to nostalgia, if you can have fond memories of it, leave it where it is. It's right there. Because those memories and whatnot were formed when you were younger, and well, when we get older, we view things differently. So if you want to remember things nicely, remember them the way they are in your head, and not maybe the way they are in reality. That's pretty much it. And I know you could say, but you fool around with old computers because they remind you of when you were young. But I don't think that's the reason why. I think if I wasn't into electronics, I wouldn't be touching any of these things, regardless of if I had them when I was young or not, which I didn't really have many. But what I will say, there's lots of stuff I had when I was young, like Beano comics and Dandy comics, but I don't have mass amounts of those, and I don't read those now, So yeah, I think the whole nostalgia thing when it comes to old computers and stuff like that, and a lot of things, is to do with the hooks that still get us today. Are you into electronics? Are you into gaming still? Yeah, well there you go. There's your link to the past. I think that's what it really comes down to, rather than trying to relive your childhood. Because reliving the childhoods, leave them where they are. The rose-tinted spectacle thing in your head. That's, I think that's where they should be left. Anyway, that being said, happy 2025, and we'll talk to you all in the next video fairly soon. See you then. Bye bye.